We're live on Good Thinking. Welcome, good thinkers from everywhere, from wherever you are tuning in. Welcome to Good Thinking Live. This is the show streaming live on LinkedIn and on YouTube, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., where we are now in this winter and ice storm, and 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time everywhere else. Let us know who you are and where you're from, and bring all of your good questions, because this is going to be fun. Now, warning, we have a huge snow and ice event, and we keep losing internet connection. This is always kind of a fear of mine when doing one of our workshops virtually. And I think, oh, what if we lost internet connection? It's kind of like the technology blunders are some of my biggest fears. Anyway, let me know that you're here and where you're from. And I am going to bring in a guest that will answer all the questions that we can possibly get in 30 minutes on how to fund your idea or how to fund your business, because this guy has the inside scoop from every angle of the industry, which I will brag on him a little bit. And he was coerced into doing this on Valentine's Day because he also happens to be my husband. So let's welcome Steven, I call him. You can call him whatever you want, Steve or Steven Saltzman. Welcome, Steven, to Good Thinking.
Thank you.
And now we're both. You're downstairs. I'm upstairs. We're both using our internet connection that is tenuous at best. Like any minute we could become pixelated, and I know you'll understand. Look who is here this morning. Good morning, Jancy, from Ventura, California. Anyway, welcome everyone. Let us know who you are and where you're from. I'll say this: where are you from, good thinkers? All right, I am going to. Can I brag on you a bit?
I love it.
It's nice to brag on your husband or partner sometimes. It's nice to brag on them. All right, so here is Steven's background and why I thought it would be good to steal a little bit of time away from all the time we are told what to think, to devote a wee bit of time to improving how to think. And so what does that have to do with funding a business? Well, stick around and you will find out, because it really does have to do with how to think about funding your business in a lot of ways, more than what to do. Although I think he'll probably sneak in a few what to do's. How about you, Steven? Do you think?
It's hard for me to avoid the what to do's, but I agree the how to thinks are probably more important than what
Okay, so how to thinks and what to do's. I'm going to give Steven background. First, we're going to say hi to Karen Gordon Brown from Karen. Where are you from? Let us know where you're from. Jeff Ginsburg, Buenos Dias. Drew, Jeff's from Seattle. Drew Rosenthal, good morning. Another Portlander. Fantastic.
Yay.
So we've got Portlanders in the house. All right, I'm going to take a minute to brag on Steven. Now, here's the deal. Bring your questions. No question, although I would debunk the idea that there are no bad questions, because we all know that there are better questions than some, but no questions will be dismissed, because we could even I might even entice him to do more than one of these good thinkings. But this one is about funding. So let me brag on Steven for a bit. Steven was the managing director for VR, so virtual reality, augmented reality, XR, displays, batteries, gaming. I'm sure I'm missing a few. And Intel Capital. And Intel Capital is the largest strategic venture capital fund in the world. They typically invest on average about $500 million a year in companies that move Intel's mission strategically. So they kind of are strategic. That's the whole idea of a strategic investment, is it aligns with your ultimate goal more versus just something that you invest in to get a return. All right, so we've got Barclay Saltzman from Washington, D.C. We have, oh good, so Karen is from Oakland, California. So we've got a lot of Americans on the show today, but we're going to be talking from an international perspective too. So let us know if If you're from US or from somewhere else, we want to know where you are. All right, let me continue with Stephen's brag sheet. So he knows that side, like he knows the side from the venture capital side, but he also knows the side from going after funding, both angel funding, friends and family funding, angel funding, and venture funding. And I'm sure he'll describe the difference, because I'm certainly going to get it wrong. Because back when I very first met him, he was the CEO of Now Software, which became the largest Macintosh software company in the world, and he had to go after that kind of funding for Now Software. And in between, he also was the founder and general manager of Intel's first Wi-Fi division. And the story is interesting because when he came home with a bumper sticker that said "Got Wi-Fi," and I hadn't even heard the word. I said, "What's Wi-Fi?" So this tells you, I'm not a total Luddite. This tells you how far back that was. So he had to start a company within a company. So entrepreneurship, go invest in companies as a VC, and then entrepreneurship, starting a company that had to go out and get funding. So that's every angle. And I of all my friends, he's kind of got the widest background to be able to answer questions on how to go after funding. So we have Randy White from Chicago. Welcome, Randy. All right, bring your questions, because if you have an idea or you have a business, and we'll talk about the distinction, you're going to want to tune in to learn how to think about funding your business. All right, my first question. Rambled on and on. Let us know. We've got someone from Boston, but sometimes it says LinkedIn user, and sometimes it's YouTube. So I've got people from YouTube and people from LinkedIn, and you don't necessarily see each other in the chat. So I'm going to try to address everything while I pluck Stephen's brain for tidbits. All right, my first question is, what is the most common mistake that entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs make when they go after funding?
Wow. There definitely are some repeating patterns, but if I had to pick the most common one, I would say it's not getting in the heads of the potential investors, not understanding how they're being evaluated, how the investors are approaching it and thinking about potential investment.
All right. So I love this because it really is not thinking about how investors think, which is great, because we want to keep this about how to think. All right. So how should people think about how investors think?
Well, it's interesting because most professional investors want to think they're very analytical, organized, disciplined, and they are maybe half the time.
They're human, the other half.
The other half, they're humans. They're not Vulcans. And emotions run wild, particularly in investing, because investors are constantly wrestling with fear of missing out, greed, and fear of failure.
All right, let me pause on that. So there's three things when considering how investors think, which tells me that investors are people. I want to say hi to Turkey. Turkey is from Saudi Arabia. Welcome, Turkey. I love when Turkey's here. Always ask such great questions. All right, so let me ask you guys, if you had to say what drives your motivation, your decision making, is it to go after an opportunity, which Stephen is labeling for investors greed, but I know that it's more nuanced than just greed, or is it fear of missing out, which is typically in the jargon of good thinking, loss aversion? Is it like trying to avoid not getting something, or is it to go after gaining something? For you guys, all of you good thinkers here, which one is it? More opportunity, we won't call it greed, opportunity, or fear of loss of opportunity? Put it in the chat. And those who do get rubber chickens. Okay, now I want to say one more thing before you elaborate on the greed, whatever, and then we're going to get into what to do about this stuff. Jennifer is freezing in Multnomah Village. How did she even get on this show? Because I know a lot of people don't have internet connection. So this is great. All right. We've got new climate change infrastructure innovators seem to be facing a fear of high risk. Must they depend on only angels? And I think that is fantastic. I want you to hold that. Actually, I'm going to pull this question in so you can see that. I'm going to leave it here for a minute because that's a really, really good question. Let's start with some understanding of when you have, let's talk about quickly the difference between an idea and a business. And then we'll focus on, like, if you actually have a business, what are the different ways of getting funding? And then I think we should tackle Karen's question, which is really good. All right.
I really like that question.
All right. So I'm going to keep it there for a minute. All right. So what is the difference between an idea and a business? I mean, can you get your idea funded? You know me, I always have these great ideas, and then I tell you, and you bring me back down to earth.
Well, one of the challenges with ideas is if it really is just an idea and it's something anybody could run with, you have no barrier to competition and you can get blown out of the water by somebody who just executes better than you. So I would say an idea is like, you may have the thought that, hey, wouldn't it be cool if people who had some spare time and a car could lease their driving skills in their car to people who needed rides, versus, building a business where you had to invest in a fleet of taxis. So that's an idea. A business is having that thought and then thinking through, okay, what would be required to do that? What would be, the logistics involved? What kind of software architecture would be required? What are the regulatory issues in every market where you want to do business? And, when you've actually thought through all those types of issues, then you can kind of put some shape around it and plan and see, is this something that actually will pencil out or not? And that's something you can take to certain types of investors, and we'll get to that. But
all right, how do we think? Let's go over like the ecosystem of investors. What are the different types of investors? Obviously, I know that I could max out my credit card. I could sell, everything I own and try to fund a business. But let's set that idea aside because, you hear the success stories, but you don't hear the massive numbers of failures. No one writes books about all the people who maxed out their credit card with an idea and failed. So we're going to set that aside. But when you break it down, how do you think about like friends and family, angel investors versus venture capitalists? And I know within venture capital, there's tons of things too. So what's a quick way to think about that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because if you look at the business press, what you read about are mostly professional investors, which are venture capitalists. And so a venture capitalist is somebody who is mostly investing other people's money for a fee, which is very different from people investing their own money. So an angel investor is typically somebody investing their own money. Well, by definition, it's their own money, but typically that's not their main job. It's just something they're doing on the side out of interest and a desire to diversify their financial portfolio and so on. And angels may include friends and family. Mm-hmm. Probably over 90% of the businesses of all types in the United States, for example, are funded by friends and family. And then another big chunk by angels who are private individuals that they may not have known before they started searching for funding. And, a fraction of a percent are funded initially by professional investors.
All right. So let's break down some of the things we need to think about. And I want to keep Karen's question to definitely hit, but let's bring some context to the infrastructure of investing, and then we'll apply it to that question. What is the difference between, what are the considerations? How should we think about approaching? If you're lucky enough to have friends and family that have funds, that's the first thing.
Right.
We don't all have that. That's number one. Number two, the angel community. And number three, the venture. Let's look at the difference between friends and family and angel investing. How do we know? What are some considerations? How should we think about this?
Well, one big difference is with the friends and family, these are people who are already in your life. You're going to see them at family events. You're going to bump into them around town or whatever. And so with any potential investor, there are certainly legal constraints on who you approach and how. But there's also, I would call it, emotional constraints, because the reality is a new venture is a high risk proposition. It's in the parlance of the trade, it's considered a risk capital. So if you can avoid it, you really don't want to raise money independent of what is allowed legally from somebody who can't afford to lose 100% of the investment without affecting their lifestyle. Because you don't want your rich aunt, for example, to be glaring at you for the next 20 years because her kid couldn't go to college because she put that money in, invested it in you, and it didn't work out.
Right. All right. So then, can anyone qualify to be an angel investor? I mean,
so the laws vary by country. In the United States, most angel investing is done by what's called accredited investors. And again, in the United States, that is defined as people with a net worth of at least $1 million, not including their primary residence, and or at least $200,000 a year in annual income for 3 years.
Does every country have, if you are from another country and you know some of the requirements that might be unique to your country, definitely share it. Or if you have a question about, some of the things like, does this apply in this country or that country? That's going to be super interesting. So we've got certain qualifications in this country to be considered an angel investor. But if you're like someone's great aunt, do you have to be a qualified investor in that way? Or could someone's aunt just say, no, I want to give you some money for your business?
Yeah. Great question. And again, obviously varies by country. In the US, there are some loopholes where non-accredited investors can put some money into a venture. So ignoring the emotional risks involved with that, there's another consideration, which is there's a limit to how many investors you can have in that kind of a private financing. So the SC. So if you've got, say, somebody who's a great friend, and they say, I can put $3,000 into your new venture, and your target to really get your prototype build, for example, say is $500,000. Well, if you brought in a lot of $3,000 investors, you may run out of the number of investors before you raise enough money to actually build what you need to get funding for the next stage. So very often, in fact, I would suggest it really is kind of best practices, is figure out what you need. And if everybody were to invest about the same amount, what is the minimum? So very often in the US, they'll say, okay, no, and don't accept an investment below, say, 50,000 or 25,000. So obviously that limits the universe of potential investors a lot. But again, you want people who have the kind of wealth where they could lose it all and it won't matter. It won't change their lifestyle one iota.
But I like that, because there's this way to think about it in terms of your relationship with the people. But there's also, like, if you need to get to a certain level, you can't get there with little increments if there's a limited number of people that can participate. So you have to kind of start with an amount that you want to raise. How should you think about the amount you want to raise? And is that different? Then we'll talk about, actually, I don't want to skip this one, but are there different kinds of investments where you go, no, this is definitely an angel type of investment versus this is definitely a VC type of investment? So how do you think about how much money, or even how do you even know how much you should potentially go after? Maybe you think you need 50,000, so you could take 5 people with 10,000, and you realize you needed 100,000, and you're already out of people.
Right. Well, so it really does start with thinking the business through, and documenting your assumptions and poking on them. Find the corner cases. Well, gee, what if the conversion rate was 3%, not 5%? Those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So you build some financial models. President Eisenhower is very famous for saying when he was a general, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Mm. So know going in, your projections are going to be wrong. Now, as entrepreneurs, they're probably too optimistic, not too pessimistic, but it could be wrong in either direction. it will be wrong, but that's not the point. The point is you're thinking through and identifying issues so
Let
they
me
can be
ask you,
addressed.
how many of you are entrepreneurs versus, you're working in a company, you still may feel entrepreneur-y, but you're not living, that's not how you make your money. How many of you are entrepreneurs versus corporate people? Now, you might be a corporate person working in an entrepreneurial endeavor within the company, but do we have entrepreneurs or corporate people in the house? And let me say hi to Stuart from Long Island, New York. All right, so now we've touched on, you've got a plan, but okay, let me ask you, is there a rule of thumb that once you get your plans in place, you should be planning for X number of months, or you should be planning to get the product to this level, or you should be like, how do you think about tranching? Because I know that there's like seed investing and this and that.
Yes.
And how do you know where to go? Do you start with Vivian Angels? Are there certain things, like to Karen's question, do you start with VCs? Those are the questions.
So the first, in terms of breaking it into digestible chunks or tranching in terms of the venture industry, there's a conventional rule of thumb, which is you want to try to raise at least 18 months of operating capital.
Okay.
I think that's at best mediocre advice and kind of misleading, because what you really need is enough funding to get you to a concrete deliverable, at which point you will be objectively, from a third-party perspective, a more valuable company and raise money then. And then typically you want to, like, if you think, okay, that's going to take us 8 months to do that, well, add 3 months because, stuff happens, things slip, and it takes time to raise money. So really important thing is, once you do your plan, break down the deliverables, that the objectively measurable deliverables, things like a working prototype, things like purchase orders from customers. Maybe it's some breakthrough distribution deal, or maybe your product is built on licensing a famous property like Marvel comic book heroes or something. So securing those kind of licenses. But look at what all the deliverables are, and then say, okay, this collection of stuff, which may include also bringing in this kind of talent, securing this kind of real estate, whatever, depending on the nature of your business. Look at the points at which you're going to be objectively more valuable, and then add a few months of buffer. One of the biggest risks, and this actually sucks a lot of companies under, is they get the money they can in dribs and drabs, never really having enough to plan longer term. And then they'll ask for what people call bridge financing. And within like the venture world, people always talk about a bridge to nowhere, because it's like, well, this is just prolonging what you're going through. That's not very comforting.
And it's very hard when you are the one with your vision to step back and challenge your own assumptions, because you hear, never quit. You hear the stories where people were on the tender hooks, but if they had quit at that time, maybe we call it a pivot to keep it safe. But the fact of the matter is, most ventures, like the vast majority, fail. Yeah. My question though is, if people are listening here, Karen says she escaped corporate in 2016. That's funny. Escape from corporate.
Recovering corporate.
Corporate recovery program. Is it better to go after investments from people who know you or know your team, or from people who know your market, but they don't know you?
Well, and actually this is great because it kind of leads into Karen's question, because before you approach investors for investment, typically people are starting businesses in industries they have some experience in. Not always, but usually. So a really good practice is identify people that you really respect, whether you know them or not, in the industry, and just say, hey, I'm working on a new venture in this industry. I really respect your opinion. I would love 15 minutes, 20 minutes to just lay out the idea and collect your feedback and really just get your help in kind of refining the idea. So you're not approaching them for investment. You're not pitching them. More often than you not, even with total strangers, people like to be helpful. It feels good. And they know that people help them along the way.
Right. All right. But again, if they don't know you, then it would be good, I guess, I'm assuming that it would be good for you to know them. So at a point, if they either have to know you, which means you probably know them, or you have to know them. But the underlying lesson in this, to me, in terms of how to think about this, is you have to know your investor. So you can't just, you have to do your research and see what things they're interested in, what they've done in the past. So whether you go after people who know you or people who know your market, you cannot skip knowing the investor.
Yeah. Well, there's two really important tools that can be helpful here. The first is actually LinkedIn. LinkedIn is your friend. You can do searches on LinkedIn and figure out, oh wait, who is the decision maker in that company for this topic area? Who by title looks like they would have knowledge or influence here?
Let me ask the LinkedIners, how many of you on LinkedIn wish you could meet someone to share your business idea or share your business idea? You wish you could meet someone on LinkedIn, but you think, where do I start? Where do I start? And, we get this all the time. People on LinkedIn, they say, oh, can I get 15 minutes to share an idea with you? And, if you get 10 of those a week, it's probably going to be a little off-putting. But if someone delved into and said, hey, Stephen, I understand. I remember when you did the investment in X, whatever, some investment you made. I really like the way you did this, this, and this, and I have this idea. So knowing and highlighting kind of that you've done your research seems like a good way to reach out on LinkedIn versus just asking for 15 minutes to, run an idea by.
Well, there's another best practice on LinkedIn, which is what's called the warm introduction. So on LinkedIn will very kindly tell you who you know in common with that person. So, if I don't know anything else, I can try to reach out directly to somebody, but I can also look at what connections we have in common and say, oh, gosh, Jennifer's a really good friend. Jennifer's connected to that person. I can send an email to Jennifer and say, hey, Jennifer, would you mind making an introduction?
As long as you put a little bit of political capital into that relationship, because some people on LinkedIn really well, other people you might know on LinkedIn because some people are more promiscuous accepting LinkedIn requests.
Why are you looking at me when you say that?
Well, me too. I love being connected, so I think it's great. I want to make sure that we hit on a couple of things. This is obviously something where you could have a whole show on entrepreneurship, funding your businesses, scaling your business, planning your business, and almost like a Shark Tank type of thing. And I know you've been approached a couple of times, but I'm like, hey, no, if you're going to do that, you're going to do that on Good Thinking. But there's two things I'd like to hit on before we wrap up. And then the third thing is to hear what people want to know about entrepreneurship, not what to think, but how to think, because maybe I could rope Stephen into some Ask Me Anythings or to discuss some other topics. So let me know in the chat, either you're live and participating now or later, what are some of the things that you would like to hear, because I might be able to rope them into some things. The two things I want to make sure that you touch on are, I'm a little always wary when I have an idea and maybe I reach out to someone on LinkedIn, or maybe I'm tied. We didn't even really get into the difference between when you're ready to go for venture funding versus angel funding. That's a whole nother topic. But how do you protect your idea from someone stealing it by approaching them to see about funding? You're also sharing your idea and it may be vulnerable. And quickly, we'll go a little over how to think about how much to ask. Like how do you figure out your valuation? I know that these are big topics, but can you touch on just starting to think about how you think about protecting your idea?
Sure.
And how you think about valuing your idea?
Sure. So depending on the nature of your idea, if it is something you can apply for a patent for, That's always a good thing. Not that patents are bulletproof. As a general rule of thumb, professional investors will not sign a non-disclosure agreement. And professional investors are like every other industry. There is a wide distribution between the truly noble and the truly slimy. And they
Does
all
it vary
exist.
by country in terms of where, like, don't even bother trying to get a non-disclosure agreement here, but these countries, there's some kind of history.
I mean, my investment experiences in the US, Israel, Europe, Scandinavia, China, Taiwan, and in Japan. And in all of those markets, and actually I didn't do, but I looked at deals in Korea and Australia. And in all of those markets, the name venture capitalists will not sign non-disclosures. And for good reason. There's liability, because very often lots of people have similar ideas at around the same time, because technologies kind of reach a point where things come together. And there's too much liability in people accusing them of stealing an idea, so they legitimately can't. Now, strategic investors sometimes see the liability as worse the other way, so they will insist that you sign a bidirectional NDA, so they can share what they're working on with you and make sure that you're not accusing them of something they've been working on for 5 years.
I suppose if your idea is so easy to steal that it's probably not that robust enough to get an investment.
Yeah, there really should be some barrier.
Some barrier to entry to get an investment. So you kind of have to just take it on faith, which means that who you approach should also be researched. Because if you are so desperate for money that you approach a vulture capitalist or someone who has a reputation for not protecting entrepreneurs' ideas or whatever, then you haven't done your research and you've gone to the wrong. And
that reminds me, I didn't get to the second tool which could help with this as well, which is Crunchbase.com. There's a free mode, so it doesn't give you access to everything. There's a paid mode to obviously get you more. But even in the free mode, you can look up a company, find out who the individual investors were. So you can see, okay, who's savvy about companies in this industry, who's got experience, success, and or failures. But you absolutely want to research anybody you approach to know, is this somebody who's generally regarded as trustworthy, or is this person kind of known as a slime bag? And,
all right, I love that. I love that. So Crunchbase.com is one thing. Another thing that I will touch on just quickly is and the reason John Hoyos was saying that he is from the UK and he took my LinkedIn learning course, Critical Thinking for Better Judgment Decision Making, and it was a game changer. And I'm not trying to, I want to get back to your valuation question. He has an idea that he would like to turn into a business, but he has little to no experience in doing so. What advice would you give to people at the beginning of their career? How do they come about getting funds to start it? So I think what we're going to do is let's talk about that in terms of, in the framework of how to think about valuation, so you can kind of cover John's question. The other thing is, in terms of just a little hint, one of the things that Stephen hinted at first is the whole thing of the planning. And one of the biggest problems is the neglecting to think that the planning fallacy doesn't apply to you. And everyone thinks, oh, the planning fallacy is for other people. So they take the inside view. They calculate how long things should take. They think that their situation is unique. So they fail to find a reference, outside reference, because they say, oh, that's different. That's a different industry. So I recommend, in addition to Crunchbase and the next thing that Stephen's going to share, because I have a little insight into this and I think it's great. I recommend you pop on to, if you have a free version or 30-day trial of LinkedIn Learning, you can pop onto the Critical Thinking for Better Judgment Decision Making, and just, if you do nothing else, just check out that planning fallacy movie, because it tells you exactly how to avoid the planning fallacy. All right, so with John's question in mind, the fact that we're coming up on our time, how do you even think about valuations? I mean, you're asking angels or venture capitalists or friends and family, shouldn't you put the highest valuation possible when you go after money?
Actually, no. In fact, a too high a valuation can really torpedo your next round of funding. So typically when you're going out for funding, it won't be your last round. And so you need to think about the sequence of funding. And there are a number of ways, like a whole show's worth of ways, to undermine getting follow-on funding, in which case you're stuck searching for that bridge to nowhere that you're not going to get. So really the best practice now is for the very first stages of funding for most businesses. I mean, obviously it's different. If your name is Elon Musk, you'll get all kinds of funding for whatever you want to do next.
If your name is Elon Musk, you don't need funding.
Which is why you can get it.
Yeah, isn't that the conundrum?
Yes. But really the best practice has become to not get funding with a set valuation. It's really a convertible note. So it's a loan that will include a clause that says, once this company has received at least, X amount of money, say $1 million from a professional investor, this note will convert into equity at a typically 20 to 25% discount to that round. Now, the discount is your incentive to the early investors saying, you're taking on more risk. This is risk adjusted. So yeah, give us access to the money now. It's a loan. And there's even two ways of doing it. So there's a convertible note where the loan you could be on the hook for. Particularly with software, more commonly you see what's called a safe note, which is something that converts into equity, but you're not liable if you go under. You don't still owe those people that money. That just it washes out, and it's just negotiating leverage on if you can get that term versus the personal liability of having to sign for it.
Yeah, that seems like a safer thing. So you're saying don't set an evaluation, create a loan that says when you get an evaluation from someone who is a professional, when you get a valuation, from someone who's a professional, then this note will convert at a discount so you will get a better deal. So you're not setting too high or too low a valuation initially.
And at the early stages, it's just too subjective. You have no product, you have no customers. It's, your friends and family might value it $1 billion because they love you. But the market will pummel you when you try to go for your next round of funding.
One of the biggest things that I think that you have kind of highlighted today and drilled into me with all of my supposedly great ideas that I come up with, is that to get inside the mind of an investor, back to the first two things, is there's a difference between investing because they love you and investing because they want something to happen with their money. And if you have a business that you're going to run as a partnership or a ma and pa or something like that, people need to know how they're going to get their money back, and hopefully with some interest. So if you're thinking, hey, don't you want to invest in me? This is going to be great. We're going to run this business. Well, sure. But unless it's charity, they're going to want to know what the exit is.
Right. Well, there's an old story in the venture capital industry with the venture capitalist mentoring a young entrepreneur, and they're walking down the street and he puts his arm around the entrepreneur and says, you look up on that hill. Do you see that giant house up on the top of the hill, the one with the massive pillars and the long driveway and the Bentley parked in front of the driveway? And she says, yeah, I see that house. And he goes, well, if you and your team really work your asses off, nose to the grindstone, year after year, in 10 years, one day, that house could be mine.
That is not where I thought you were going with that. I thought you're going to get it. You're going to get that house. It's like, no, I'm investing in you.
The venture capitalists are looking for their exit.
They're looking for their exit. Okay, for a point of clarification, because Karen is on the JOB with these questions. Fantastic. Can you just quickly talk about, we're going to go a little long, can you quickly talk about the difference between a note and a bond? And let me say this, if you are interested in more of these entrepreneurial, how to think things, do let me know in the chat, because I cannot convince Stephen without your requests. Like if you don't say you want more, I'm not going to be able to convince Stephen. So I need your help if you do. But quickly, can you quickly explain the difference between a note and a bond for Karen?
Yes, and actually, there's two more resources I can point people to that can help with a lot of this stuff. Because the good news is, where 20 years ago people had to spend a lot of money with lawyers for these documents, Y Combinator and the National Venture Capital Association have very generic sample documents. So if you're looking for a convertible note or a safe agreement, like the Y Combinator website has multiple flavors of it. And they will explain the different types on that site. And then nvca.org.
So can we put these in, let's say this, why don't you at the end of this put links to all of these in the comments so people can find you in the comments, and we'll do that after we're done. And then they can click on all of these resources. And we already have one LinkedIn, excuse me, that says, yes, more of these insights from Stephen. We've got Carlos saying, I caught all Becky said on planning fallacy and biases because I've just finished your critical thinking for better judgment decision making. Yes, nice. So you kind of know there are some tips and tricks in that one. So anyway, I think that's great. Now, can you just quickly address the difference between the bond and the note? And then we will is that a quick thing or is that a long thing?
It's a little longer, but to Karen, I would point you to the Y Combinator website because they do give several examples of different types of notes that are common. Bonds are typically, I think you had the question about infrastructure, and those are typically much bigger financings where a bond might be required, but that is a lot longer topic. Right. I do want to, if I can, circle back to John, because I don't think I completed answering his question, which is my best advice is if you are new in your career and you want to start a new venture and aren't really quite sure how to go about it, first thing to think about is what are some of the most important skills that'll be required to turn your idea into reality, and then find people you can team up with, because they'll help you find your blind spots. And even if you're really experienced, getting the right people around you who are coming from different perspectives is vital.
Well, so I'm going to turn that into, I think that's excellent because, it seems kind of obvious, well, you got to get your team together. But first is to assess your circle of competency. And the point isn't to make sure that your circle of competency covers every possible imaginable thing. But the point is to make sure that you know where the boundaries are so that when you bump up against those boundaries within your circle of competency today, like obviously in a few months, it can be different. Then you need to go to someone who might be able to fill out those areas outside of your circle of competency. So we've got to valuations. We've got to touched on valuations. We've touched on how to protect yourself. You kind of just need to make sure that you have enough there that someone can't just easily take your idea and run with it in 5 minutes, or it wasn't that great of an investable idea to begin with, or you should get it further down the yellow brick road before you go after investments. And we're finding out if people want more of this. So let us know if you want more, because we've got more on funding, planning, scaling, selling your business, all kinds of things, and how to think about this. Next week, we've got a really interesting show that is not with Stephen, but with Alana Redstone from the University of Illinois, talking about how to increase your perspective quotient. So it's a very interesting thing about how to get the most out of viewpoint diversity. So that'll be an interesting thing, how to think about that. Before we wrap up with Stephen, again, let us know if you want more. Be sure to tune in Mondays on LinkedIn for Good Thinking, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, or on YouTube. You can go subscribe on my YouTube channel, Becky Saltzman. Just go on, subscribe, hit that bell if you want notifications. But I'm going to ask Stephen a question. Final question. There's so much more. What is the most common, I should say, blunder that you have seen investors make? Not people going after investments, but actual investors make. What's the most common blunder you have seen, mistake?
Well, I can answer in the abstract, or I can confess my biggest investment blunder.
Okay. Who wants to know? Do you want the general answer, or do you want Stephen to reveal his biggest personal investment blunder? I kind of want to know because I don't think he's confessed this to me. So, all right, let us know what you want. And then
Not my proudest moment.
Not your proudest moment. Okay, we've all had those. So let us know if you want to know Stephen's not so proudest moment or a common blunder that investors make. And I'm going to let you choose because I can't keep track. So you choose which one. Karen says his. So okay. Karen says his. LinkedIn says Stephen's. So okay. People clearly want to know your biggest investment.
Fine.
Okay. Go.
So fairly early in my investment career, I was approached from a new entrepreneur in Israel with a really interesting idea. He had the idea that websites like MapQuest were being popular, but he said all these driving direction instructions were flawed because they weren't taking traffic into account. So his idea was getting a user base who would call in when there was an accident or road work or something like that that was slowing down traffic. And at the time, I thought, well, okay, all this mapping data, everything is coming from off-the-shelf sources. There's no unique technology. And now you're asking people to talk on the phone while they're driving. That doesn't sound good. And how motivated are they going to be to report stuff? And I turned it down. And what I didn't do was look beyond what is he starting with to what could he evolve it into, which was a service that automated the collection of cell phone tracking from the carriers versus individuals calling in. And that company was Waze, and it later sold for $1.3 billion. And I could have probably invested at about a $10 million valuation.
Oops. Well, I think this is interesting because I think the takeaway lessons as I'm hearing this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and Waze beat you. That was Waze. That was Waze. It wasn't a theoretical Waze. It was Waze. That's what it was. So, yes. So absolutely. All right. So here's the takeaway lesson. A lot of times I think that you might not see the future because the person with the idea doesn't articulate the future. So whether you are, like you might have said, I really don't see people picking up the phone and calling in. It's not safe to be picking up the phone and calling in accidents. But you didn't see the future of how that data could be tracked without calling.
I wasn't asking the right question.
You weren't asking the right question, but also as the person going to the investor, clearly they had someone that asked a better question later, which it all comes down to better questions, which is why there are bad questions, but I digress. But that person could have said, as a person seeking investment, could have said, well, you may wonder, this such and such you ask, well, the future is this. So the good questions can be generated by the person that is inquiring and the person that is seeking information. That's a two-way, and you need that match because at that point, the Waze person did not tell you what you should be seeing about the future, and you didn't ask.
Well, it's really a critical thinking question in both directions because he didn't have that vision of the future either. Then
that's my
which
point.
Is why he didn't bring it up.
That's my point.
Right.
Yeah.
But the question was, well, as my father used to tell me, any dumb schmuck can find reasons to say no or why something will fail. Because intelligence and cleverness comes from figuring out how something can happen. So even if the entrepreneur hadn't brought it up, I should have thought about, well, okay, that is an issue, but what could they do? If I were to be a good investor, I'd also be a good advisor. And I could say, hey, let's build the roadmap to automating this.
And particularly when something is seen as kind of morally ambiguous, like the idea of calling on your cell phone or texting while driving, people can get so entrenched with that as the barrier when that really doesn't even need to be in the picture. So,
right.
That you can make a moral judgment. Oh, this is a company that's trying to get people to talk on their cell phones instead of stepping back and saying from a more critical thinking, is that the most reliable, relevant evidence that this is going to be a good investment? Anyway, we could go on and on, so we need to stop because it's like really long. We're supposed to go 30 minutes. We went 49, 50. Tune in. Like I said, if you're watching this later and you see and you have questions and you want more of this, I think I can entice Stephen, but I need to have your support, good thinkers. And tune in every Monday, because we are taking a little bit of time each week, stealing a little bit of time away from all the time we're told what to think, to really focus on improving how to think. And that's a luxury that we deserve. Our brains deserve it. So I'm going to get some of the interesting good thinkers from around the world. Sometimes it'll just be me, other times them. Tune in, YouTube, LinkedIn Live, Monday morning, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Have a great week. Thank you guys so much for being